Well, right out of college, I worked for a church in the suburbs in north of Houston. And through the grace of God, this church had bought a collard green farm. It was pretty awesome that they were going to build the church building on. And so it was pretty great to have this land and to go buy it. And it was an exciting place to see ministry begin to form. And right at the front of this property was a massive, I believe, oak tree. But it was huge. I mean, it was monumental. You couldn't miss it even just driving by. It was this gorgeous tree, and I was fascinated by it. I was always kind of looking at it as we drove by, could sit under its branches on a bench. It was pretty incredible. So you can imagine my shock when one day after a storm, I drove by and that massive tree was cracked in half and laying across the ground. And my initial thought was, dude. And then I was like, it got struck by lightning. How else could you take that thing down? That's crazy. And so I pulled the car in and I went over there like, man, I've never been around a tree that was struck by lightning. It's still smoldering, will still be hot. What's gonna happen? And so I walk up to it and I looked around, I'm like, wait, if it got hit by lightning, wouldn't there be like charred marks? Wouldn't it be like blackened in places? And I'm looking around and I don't see any. I'm like, wouldn't it have been on fire? There's no signs of a fire at all. And then suddenly the obvious hit me. As I peered closer to the tree, the inside of it was hollow. And where there was still bark on the inside, you'd grab it and it was brittle at places or pulpy. And I realized lightning didn't take this down in a moment. Bugs took this down over many moments. That this thing slowly got chewed apart from the inside. And over time, you couldn't see it happening. But as it was slowly being chewed up on the inside, it was weakening. And then there was a big moment, but not with a crash of lightning. It was with a gust of wind. This great tree fell down. Now, why do I mention that to you? For this reason. We've been in this series talking about love and sex and romance, but about marriage. We watched a couple fall in love and get married. And many of us want that. We want a marriage. And yet there's two ways to destroy a marriage. You can blow it up in a ball of flames of really infidelity or bursts of anger or something dangerous. But for many marriages, if you look around, it falls apart, not with a huge bang, but with a slow unraveling over time. A couple of years ago in Britain, the number one cause of divorce changed. It used to be adultery, infidelity, but it moved. And their number one choice or reason given was, we've grown apart. That something happened and we've now drifted from each other. The American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers in the United States says 67.5% of all marriages failed because of a breakdown in communication. Obviously, we were communicating early on, and that communication was exciting and thrilling to us, and we got married, but then something happened after marriage where that communication began to break down, and we got to a place where we say, hey, this relationship has slowly been chewed apart from within. Adultery was number two, with 30% of all divorces involving infidelity. And so for many of us, if we're honest in here, statistically speaking, if you're not married, you want to be. Or if you are married, you want to stay married, or at least you did on the front end, right? That you want to be in this relationship. And it's fascinating. Mark Regnerus does extensive research on marriage and romance and love in the United States and now beyond. And as he's studying it, he says, hey, there's four key values that people want in marriage as he takes surveys, not sort of finding it in the scriptures or something, just for him, like as you survey people, what are the values that lead people to marriage? And it's not love, because you can have love and not be married. He said, but love becomes this engine that drives you to this covenant of marriage. But why would love drive you to it? What does marriage offer that we all want so bad? And he says there's four things in survey after survey that people keep saying this is what they want. This is why they get into it. Number one is totality, is what he calls it. They want totality. That means I want someone who wants all of me, that I don't have to edit and dismiss and protect, but I can be around someone that wants all of me, relationally and emotionally and financially and physically, that I want someone that wants to be with all of me and I want to be with all with them. A beloved is not someone you just live with, but someone you live for. That I want someone who lives for me and I live for them. Number two is children. That I want our love to not just give life to me, but love to literally become life. A life that lives on beyond me, that has a future, that I want kids. I want to see my family and my line live on. Number three is permanence. That in a world of impermanence, I want something that will last. People enter into marriage because they want till death do we part. And number 4 is sexual fidelity. If you think about sexuality, or getting naked, that's nudity, complete vulnerability in front of somebody. You want to be vulnerable, typically speaking, where you feel safe, right? Our greatest vulnerabilities happen in places where we feel safe, relationally and physically. And so people enter into marriage because they want a sense of permanence, that you're gonna be there for me and you're gonna be faithful to me. We want those 4 things: totality, children, permanence, and sexual fidelity. And yet we're seeing more and more in a culture, we have trouble holding those things together. The tide of culture moves towards disintegration, not with a loud bang, but with a little biting away at nitpicky conversations or irritating activities. We suddenly see relationships fall apart. And it's why a lot of young people are getting cynical about the possibility of love. And yet the good news is it need not be that way, that it is possible to have a relationship that can continue to flourish throughout all seasons, that it doesn't just have to be the spark of love, it can be a continued burning fire of love throughout your whole life. And so as we enter into this passage, we're gonna watch a couple, not with the passion of their married night, although that was fun and slightly awkward, but we're gonna watch them now journey into a deepening of love together. How do you avoid the disintegration of a relationship? How do you keep the love alive in a marriage? We're gonna watch a couple give us the key pieces to keep love alive. And I know for some of you who aren't married, you're like, well, good luck, I'll pray for the married people near me. Are there any near me? Hey, yes, there are, and do pray for them. And number 2 is you take notes, because this is what you want, this is what you need, this is what I'm gonna give you that will give you hope that you can have an enduring relationship in the future. 4 things that help this couple deepen. But starting in verse 13, these are the others speaking, probably the woman's friends. And they say, return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon you. The last time we looked at this text, do you remember this couple had a fight and they were separated, and she asked her friends for help to reconcile this most intimate of relationships. And they do help her. And they brought them back together, and we're watching them together. And as the couple's watching them together, they say, hey, return. And it has the imagery of a dance. And remember, this is poetry. So you're like, was she really at a dance? And they're like, hey, come on, stay at the party. And she's like, no, we're leaving. Like, is it something like that? Or is it just a metaphor? It's hard to say. But the reality is they're saying, turn to us that we may look on you. And then it seems to be the man who says, why should you look upon the Shulamite as upon a dance before 2 armies? That here you have like armies coming out with regalia, and there's move, counter move, and point, counter point. They're watching this woman. Maybe she's in a dance and saying there's something mystical, magical about her physically dancing, or maybe it's just our relationship coming apart and now moving closer together, and there's something mystical and beautiful about it. But we begin to leave the crowd, and as they've been brought together, we hear the man speak. And as they come back together, he begins to describe her. And something fascinating is gonna happen. On their wedding night, he starts from her top of her head and moves down her body, celebrating her. Now we see them later in their relationship somewhere, and he starts from her feet up. And it says in verse 7, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, O noble daughter. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master's hand. Excuse me, that's chapter 7, verse 1. So maybe he starts at her feet because she's dancing and she's got moves. And he's like, oh man, look at those feet. Maybe it's just a way to keep things interesting. I already did the head up. Let's go toe up first. Like, I don't know. But the reality is, he says, but there's not just a beauty, there's a nobility to it. It's fascinating as he compliments her. There's sexual language, but it moves not just from beauty to nobility. There's something regal about you. Look at the way he praises her. But then he moves to her hips and he says they're like rounded thighs, they're like jewels. That's the idea of handcrafted earrings. It's used in other places, jewelry. It's like, hey, there's a craft here. And he's looking at maybe the curve of her hips. And he says, hey, this is expertly crafted. You're like my little Shakira, and your hips, they don't lie. They're saying something. And it's a reference to God. You've been crafted by God, and it's perfect. It's beautiful. In verse 2, he says, your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Don't be put it off by rounded, by the way. A navel is concave. Yes, we agree. Yeah, and so like a bowl. And so he's saying, hey, your navel is like a bowl of wine. And you're like, wine from your belly? Like, what are you talking about right now? Like, I thought my generation came up with body shots. And you're like, no, Solomon lived in 900 BC. No, I'm just kidding. He's not talking about that, you weirdos. What he's saying is, notice he says, your navel's a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. The idea there is, as her husband, he's saying to you, your body satisfies me. It never lacks mixed wine. What he's saying is, you're a constant source of delight for me. I didn't delight in you when you were younger and now I'm moving on. He says, I look at you now and as our life continues together, you're a constant source of interesting pleasure. You're not dried out and you're not empty. As we progress together, there's still something fascinating about you that delights me. That's a beautiful thing to say. He says, your belly is a heap of wheat encircled with lilies. Careful with this one, fellas. For those of you taking notes, you're like, baby, your tummy's like a sack of oats. You're like, no, stop. What does he mean? He could mean that it's like a heap of wheat tied in the middle, like an hourglass figure. He could be saying that. Likely, he's looking at her body and going from the concave of her belly into the slope of her stomach. I don't know, but why call it a heap of wheat? The idea there is wheat. Wheat was a staple crop in their culture. Wheat equals life. So he's saying, your body is life-giving to me. So he says, you're like wine. You're fun. And you're like wheat. You're fertile. You're life. And so for him, it's natural to compare eating and sex together. We do that because they're things that are nourishing to us and satisfying and delight us. And that's what he's saying. And the flower imagery probably is he's calling to mind a feast. It's a delight. It's a party to be with you. Verse 3, your breasts are like two fawns, twins of gazelle. There's still a youthfulness to you. That's the language of their wedding night. But now here, later in their life, he can still say it. There's still something youthful and alive to you. But then notice how the imagery changes in verse 4. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Towers had military purpose, that you would get it up there to communicate strength, and so you could see enemies from afar. But he says, you're like a tower of ivory. There's a strength and there's a dignity to you, an elegance to you. Your eyes are pools in Heshbon by the gates of Bath Rabim. That's a tougher one. The water comparison, to say your eyes are like a deep pool, there's a reflectiveness to them. There's a depth to you. Heshbon was a Moabite city, so possibly he's identifying the exotic. There's something still wild about you. There's something still mysterious and otherworldly about you. You're like a water that's in a gate that I have to get through that's owned by the enemy. There's a place of that. There's something mysterious still about you. Your nose is like a tower of Lebanon, which looks towards Damascus. Again, that's a statement of dignity, that Lebanon had a prominent role in protecting the important city of Damascus. What he's saying there is, I feel safe with you. I can trust you. That the way you're looking out for me and for our family. And your head crowns you like Carmel, and your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in your tresses. Carmel was a mountain range at the top of the Mediterranean. So it fits that now that he's at the top of her head. He says, you are like what crowns our blessed land. This lush, vibrant forest on top of a mountain. He says, your hair, your head, there's a dignity to it and a provision to it. And so maybe she's got dark hair. Maybe she put some purple highlights in, or maybe she's got a healthy sheen. It's hard to say. But he says, hey, you've got this hair flowing down of black and purple. And he says, and I'm held captive by it. There's something about you, even now, that's captivating. Now, we're getting to our first 2 points out of 4 right now. I wanted to get through all that. You did great. Notice, he does mention her body. He does mention her breasts, but he lingers here at her neck, her eyes, her nose, and her hair. He's always been attracted to her. He's always thought she was hot. But notice there's an esteem here, and that esteem has grown over time. Note, familiarity has not bred contempt, and that matters. He doesn't just love her body. You can be turned on by a body and never look at someone's face. But he focuses on her face. Why? Because he doesn't just see a body he's sexually attracted to. He sees her, and he wants her, and you have dignity. And marriage has not diminished her in his eyes. It has elevated her, right? So how do you keep love alive? How do you have a relationship that endures? Let me give you 2 points out of this text. Number one is you see on one side a commitment to personal growth. A commitment to personal growth. What do I mean by that? Well, what happens in marriage is you get married to somebody and you're still probably infatuated for the first couple weeks, right? That's why they call it a honeymoon. It's a sweet couple weeks, right? Cycle of a moon, everything's honey, right? And then after a while, what happens? They do something and you're like, oh, I don't like that. Hey, you shouldn't do that. And then they do it again. And then you see it's a habit and a lifestyle, and I've bound myself to it forever. Oh my God, what have I done? And you start to realize your sweet honey baby darling, dove, precious, beautiful one has flaws. And what do you do with that? For many of you, you're gonna discover your spouse is a fearful person and they will tend towards anxiety. Some of you will realize, hey, my spouse is kind of proud. They're opinionated and can be selfish. Others say, hey, this person's inflexible. There's a tendency to be demanding and then sulky if they don't get their way. Or you may be abrasive and harsh and someone says, hey, you tend to want respect more than you want love. You may be an undisciplined person that is unreliable and disorganized. You may marry an oblivious person who tends to be distracted, insensitive, and unaware of how they're coming across in conversation. You may marry a perfectionist with a tendency to be judgmental and critical and also to get down on themselves. You may marry an impatient, irritable person with a tendency to hold grudges or lose their temper. You may marry a highly independent person who does not like to be responsible for the needs of others, does not like making joint decisions, and will most definitely hate asking you for help. You may marry somebody who wants to be liked, and so they'll tend to shade the truth or keep secrets or work way too hard to try to please everybody. You may marry somebody who's thrifty, but thrifty and miserly are real close, and they may be ungenerous in the way they treat people. Whoever you marry will not be perfect. They're gonna be something like that. And when it lands on you, it's a scary thing. Because when you see that in your friends, then you have a choice, like, do I tell them or do I not tell them? And you have that choice because you're like, because at the end of the day, it's not my life. Like, hey man, you should probably take a bath or something. I don't know, it's your choice, it's your life, or whatever it is they're dealing with. But when you're married to them, if they have a problem, if they're selfish, if they're a bad listener, if they're impatient, if they're those things, you go, but I'm bound to that. That now affects me. And when you see those flaws in people, it can be scary. Now, what do you do when you find out you married a sinner? I'll tell you one thing, and this one, you will find comfort if they are a person who's committed to personal growth. If you look at them and go, hey, you know what? This person is flawed. They're not perfect, but they're perfectible because they're not stagnant. They are moving. There may be some flakes in the water, but it's not a stagnant pool. It's a flowing river. This is someone who's moving somewhere. That's what you want to see. This is why Christian, it's so important to marry a Christian. One of the reasons is because God says that when Jesus Christ brings his grace into your life, it's not just a ticket to heaven later when you die. It is that the same God who rescued you now works within you, both to will and to act according to his good pleasure. That it's not just that person committing to personal growth. It's that God himself says, I'm gonna put my spirit in you who moves you to obey my decrees. Decrees like love one another and be joyful and be hopeful and some beautiful things God wants to work into a person. And when you see the flaws of your spouse, what will comfort you is knowing, hey, they're flawed, but they're a flawed person of faith. And as they trust God, God is gonna shape them. God is gonna work on them. And I'm gonna be the same way. You want someone that's committed to growth like that. When we got married, I remember Donna and I, when we would disagree on something, I would marshal my points of why my viewpoint was superior and explain those in a cogent, lucid way, and then be baffled by the fact that she wasn't suddenly enthusiastic about this very helpful correction in her decisions. And it took time for me to realize, oh, so you're saying the tone is wrong. What is this tone? Because you keep bringing that up. And I had to learn over time, I don't communicate very well about some certain elements in life. I can be lucid in explanation, but sometimes inconsiderate in the expression. And I need to learn how to be gentle when I talk to somebody about things that are close to their life. And I had to learn. And I think it comforts Donna to see he can be taught because God is working on his life, right? For me, let me tell you one of my favorite parts about my marriage right now. That is when I get up in the morning, I get up early, but when I come into the kitchen, one of the clearest mental pictures of my life is just on the other side of the kitchen. We have a little couch, a little sitting area, and it's Donna sitting in that corner, She's got a stack of books in her Bible on this little chest and a journal. And every morning she's sitting with the Lord and he's shaping her. And so I know that that's good for her. It's good for her soul, but that's good for me too. And I love that I'm married to someone that wants to be holy, wants to be like Jesus, wants to be loving and kind and generous and holy and pure and upright. She wants all that, not to get my approval in an insecure way. She wants that because God is doing that in her life, but I benefit from that holiness that I know she's not stagnant, she's moving. And you want to be in a marriage where you don't get bored. You don't suddenly say familiarity is breeding contempt. What you do is you grow together. And you say, hey, we're two people that are constantly pursuing the Lord. And as we do that, how do you reconcile perpetual novelty and permanence? Because we want both. I want the permanence of you'll be there till death do I part. But man, you're getting a little boring. How do you reconcile that? You do it by being a person who's always growing. Because then you'll be a couple that's always growing. I remember I once accidentally ended up on vacation with a couple in their 80s. I won't tell you the story. But it turned out being delightful, sitting on their back porch, watching the sunset every night. Because as they would tell me about their day, antiquing and whatnot, the conversation would always drift towards what God was teaching them as they read a devotional book in bed together every night and how they were going to apply it in the prison ministry they led. And I remember sitting there and going, look at y'all, laughing, disagreeing, struggling, learning together your whole life. And as I watched them rock together in those chairs, I was like, it's possible. It's possible to have permanence and perpetual novelty. And you do it with a commitment to personal growth. I will be shaped by my God for his glory and the good of the person closest to me. And then number two, which is very close to it is, and I'm going to celebrate the good. How do you keep a marriage strong? You commit to personal growth, and then you celebrate the good in the other when you see it. And I don't say admire, because you can admire silently. But notice he communicated to her. He compliments her. Notice he externalizes what he values. Lori Poon, I think is how she says it. What kind of name is Poon? Is a Harvard-educated lawyer and a couples mediator. And she says this about divorce. She says, years before a divorce, most of these couples suffer from a rampant cultural problem, relationship rudeness. As human beings, it's our nature to take things for granted so that what we come to expect, we come to neglect. We assume that because we said, I do, our spouse knows that we love him or her. So why do we have to go out of our way to say things that are kind or appreciative? I would hear things from clients like, why should I thank him for loading and emptying the dishwasher? He ate on those dishes too. Why should I thank her for helping my son with his math homework? I expect her to do that. The worst was when clients would say, I shouldn't have to praise my mate when he does something nice for someone else. Wrong. In a committed relationship, it's your job to be your mate's head cheerleader with comments like, that was so kind of you to spend time with John yesterday when he needed your advice. John is lucky to have you as a friend. Those are compassionate words that warm the heart and the soul. And many couples I work with neglect their role as their mate's cheerleader, thereby leaving a job opening for somebody else. You have to realize I'm going to see their flaws. And the human nature is to focus on those flaws. That's all of us. We tend to move towards the negative, right? And yet, how do you keep a marriage alive? It's not by focusing on the insufficiencies of your mate. And I'm not saying put your head in the sand and ignore them, but I mean, don't neglect what's beautiful about them, right? Make a priority to celebrate. And even just selfishly, what's celebrated is repeated, right? So by all means, tell them like, man, you unload the dishwasher like a fiend. Like you are amazing at that. You are next level. If there was a D1 dishwashing unloader, you'd be highly recruited, all right? You'd be a blue chip. Like, you just try, I don't know, try it and see if it works. But how do you keep a marriage alive? You don't let the compliments fade, right? You keep throwing wood on that fire so that it'll burn. I remember being at a wedding once, and there was this older gentleman that got up to speak, and when he got up to give his well wishes at the reception, he looked at the couple and he said, hold hands. And they held hands. And he said, now never stop. He said, because when you hold hands, when you date, because just that act of closeness is special. But then over time, you're like, your hand's sweaty, and I'd rather watch TV, and I want to have sex periodically. I don't know, can we schedule it? But then we live the rest of our lives as roommates, and the intimacy goes away in the everyday moments of life. And he says, fight for those. Fight to celebrate. Fight for those little intimate touch points. Make a commitment to celebrate what you see that's good, right? If your spouse is committed to growing and developing and learning, that's how you're gonna find each other interesting and keep celebrating. Donna and I are not bored of talking. And that fascinates some people that when they ask us, have you seen this show? No. Have you seen this show? No. Have you seen this show? No. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, one of it is because I have 3 children. Like, I have no time for these shows you speak of. But the other is for Donna and I, we like to go sit on the back porch and talk because she's learning things that are interesting. And one of the things I love when we do that is she'll compliment my sermons, which is so novel. Because if anyone should be bored of them right now, it's her. And one of the comments we get so frequently from guests at our church that know us, they're like, I love watching Donna watch you preach because she's interested. Like, you know how many pastors' wives aren't? They've just heard it all, seen it all, and they're bored. She said, but she shouts you down, celebrates you, and then I was like, and then when we get home, she tells me the parts she liked. And she waits and tells me the parts she didn't till way later when I'm less fragile. And I go, she is aware. There is no more mystery to me. You know, there's no more like, well, I didn't see that coming. You're like, yeah, you did. But she makes a choice to see the good. And then she doesn't lock it in, she says it. And I know I'm in the right profession, right? But it means a lot for her to celebrate what's good. And it means a lot for your spouse to do it too. Don't let familiarity breed contempt. Fight the pull towards disintegration with celebration. So you commit to growing and you commit to celebrating what's good about them. He sees her and he celebrates her, right? And then here's the other maybe selfish part of it, is that admiration leads to affection. It's praise that kindles passion. And it works here because, again, vulnerability and safety go hand in hand. If I feel safe with you, if I feel that you care about me, you value me, you love me, then I'm more open to being vulnerable with you, to tell you more about my life, to tell you more stories, to share more with you. And in a marriage, if I feel safe with you, if I feel like you're for me, if I feel like you're with me, then I share more with you. And then naturally, that's not just emotionally, that becomes physically. So how do you keep a vibrant physical sex life alive? It starts with admiration. It starts with celebration. It starts verbally. And as he praises her and compliments her, what happens? It begins to kindle affection. And it gets fun. So verse 6, how beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all your delights. Now, he could be saying, O loved one, with all your delights, or love. Love has in it an abundance of delights if you focus on it. And then in verse 7, he tells her, your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. So he returns to the breasts. Is it biblical for guys to be into breasts? Apparently, yes. So just trying to read you the Bible, folks. But what happens? As they celebrate each other, he gets excited. Your stature is like a palm tree. That means she's a slender woman and with ample fruit is the idea that he's communicating. Then in verse 8, he says, I like the I say part. I say, I will climb that palm tree and lay hold of its fruit. Does anyone need me to explain that? Do we feel like we got a handle on what's happening here? Let me read you one commentary, and I quote, the primitive nature of climbing equipment possessed by the ancient orchard farmer made this no small task. I remember when I read that, I'm like, I think he's fine, dude. I think he found a way. Oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine and the scent of your breath like apples and your mouth like the best wine. That's sensual language, but what's he saying? Ample clusters, sweet scent, smooth taste. This is the language of delight in life. This is what you want a marriage to be, that we delight. But notice where his delight's aimed. It's in her, not somewhere else. Now, what's interesting is, you remember last talk? He tried to do this. Oh, my darling, my love, my beautiful one. And she shut him down. Not tonight. And it was a little awkward. Now you see, hey, there's a reconciliation, a good communication, a celebration. And now as he begins down this path again of complimenting her, she actually interrupts him. And in the middle of verse 9, she says, it goes down smoothly for my beloved, gliding over lips and teeth. What's fascinating about that, and you have to be so careful here to not get into stereotype, and I'm not trying to get into stereotypes or overstate anything, but it's fascinating. I've read so many books on modern love, dating, romance, marriage, those sorts of things, and you see over and over again in surveys, women continuously push for the need to feel cherished, to feel valued. And men continue to express a desire for sex, right? Now, both want both things. Men want to be cherished and valued, and women do enjoy sex within a safe and supportive relationship like this. And yet, you see, the weight of value tends to be different. And what's beautiful about that is that's what love is. Love is, in many ways, let me serve you in a way that's maybe not necessarily how I like to be served or what I'm looking for. But can I serve you in a way that I know meets your needs? And then know that at different times, in different ways, you're gonna serve in ways that really meet my needs. And as I watch someone choose to understand what's meaningful to me and to do that thing, wow, that communicates so much value. And it makes me wanna do the same for them. And so as we continue this cycle of supporting and encouraging each other, then we look and we begin to meet each other's needs. So he's celebrating her physically, he's calling her wine, she's like, yes, I am. And it goes down smoothly for my beloved. She says, I am for you. And then she says in verse 10, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. Guys, write that down. Ladies too, but his desire is for me. Why does she interrupt the song that says, I'm totally into the song? Why does she say that? Because she sees he has taken his desires, and as they grow together, he doesn't start aiming them elsewhere. He doesn't start looking at women that walk by. He doesn't start taking his desires to a screen. He takes his natural desires and he continually aims them at her. His desire is for me. What's the third thing that's gonna keep a marriage alive and thriving? It's covenant. It's commitment. I belong to you and you belong to me forever. And in this tight circle, nobody else gets in. This is a huge value for God. Malachi chapter 2, God tells his people in the Old Testament in verse 13, he says, here's another thing you do. He'd been listing things that bothered him. He says, you cover the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with groaning. He says, you show up here and you're crying. He says, but I no longer regard your offering or accept it with favor. He says, there's people that are here worshiping. He says, but I'm not interested in that. And verse 14, yet you say, for what reason? And he says, because the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Verse 16, I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel, and him who covers his garment with wrong, says the Lord of hosts. So take heed to your spirit and do not deal treacherously. He said it's treacherous to tell someone till death do us part and then depart from them when they get inconvenient. Now, look, I know I'm treading on careful ground here because we tend to hear statements like that and hear finality when you hear judgment and conviction. But you need to read the Bible. God is honest when we are treacherous and liars and have done wrong. He lets sin stand at its full height. He doesn't diminish it or make excuses. But where sin abounds, grace abounds more. So I want you to hear that right now, the power of Jesus to heal and to forgive and to restore the fields the locusts have eaten and to make a door of trouble into a valley of hope far surpasses any wrong you've done. And yet he looks at his people and he says, I want you to commit to love someone. And when your desires naturally drift, your commitment makes you turn the wheel back. And you say, no, I committed to this person and I've got desires and I'm aiming them at her. I'm not gonna look at someone else. I'm not gonna start to look for someone else. Well, he talks to his wife this way. Oh, well, she dresses up like that. Oh, well, he does this. I'm not gonna do that. I am going to aim my affection at the person I promised to love until death do us part. If you notice at the beginning, she's called Shunammite or Shulamite. People debate where that comes from. One commentator says, maybe it's from the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war, which no one else thinks. That guy's kind of standing on his own. Some people think maybe it's the name of the city she's from, which is possible, but most think it's the feminization of the word Solomon. And this poem is likely either about or from Solomon, both. And so here, when she conceives of herself, the word Solomon comes from the word peace or wholeness. So maybe she looks and says, I'm complete. Or maybe it's, no, we're so knit together, our lives and our names have mingled. We belong to each other. And again, that's statistically what we all want. It's scary, the risk of being hurt. But statistically, we long for someone to look at you and say, I promise to love you until death do us part. You want a marriage that'll last, you decide, when my desires begin to whisper about the beauty of the other, I will aim my affections at my beloved. Because here's the thing, we have natural inclinations in our affections, but they are shaped culturally. You can see that. I mean, you've looked at what was the model of female attractiveness in different decades. You've seen those pictures where back in the 1920s, the model of female beauty was a small woman that looked like a boy on cocaine. You know, it was just like, oh, okay, that was the standard of beauty then. Now it's different. It looks like Kim Kardashian. These are different shapes. And is that wrong? No, there's something about you that maybe you're drawn to different shapes and sizes of people, and yet there is a cultural conditioning to it. You see it in music. Why do you like the music you like? Because I'm an original, Ben. Well, sure you are. But decades ago, when somebody heard the big band strike up, they were like, oh! And this place went nuts. Yeah, did you hear that trombone? That's my trombone. And for some of you, if you heard that song, you wouldn't be like, wow, okay. Why? Is it because they were so dumb back then and you're more sophisticated? No. It's because we all like music, but it gets shaped culturally over time, right? And what you're attracted to physically, what you think is valued, is shaped in the culture. It is. And so as you grow, you need to go, hey, what am I going to be attracted to? Let me keep aiming these desires at the person I committed to. That I'm going to keep leaning in to their looks, what I love about them. I'm going to keep speaking out parts of their character that I love. I'm not going to let the enemy put these little granules of resentment in that begin to put separation between us. I am committed to you. My desires, they go to you and no one else. And when you have that kind of commitment, that's where you have a marriage that, hey, maybe the fire begins to cool a little bit, but you can throw some logs of respect and love and celebration on it, and that fire can burst up again. You don't have to go find warmth at somebody else's fire, right? Proverbs 5 says, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. And then as you look at it, he's not talking about water. He's talking about the wife of your youth. Let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated with her love always. Again, it mentions breast there, not specifically because that's not a necessary part of the reproductive process of sex. It's saying, husband, you're going to be delighted by someone. Aim that delight at your wife. And ladies, aim it at your husband. Don't let it go out into the streets. And as he talks about the danger of the adulteress, he says, can you scoop fire into your lap and not be burned? You be careful. There's been a number of studies from lawyers, and many of them say the number one reason for divorce in America today is Facebook. They say because as we scroll through the other, we develop a fantasy version of the other, and it gives us contempt for the one we're with. And the grass looks greener on the other side. Right? So I'm not saying get off Facebook, but maybe dial it down a bit. And when you are married, say, you know what? When we face some friction, we're going to push through that with healthy communication. And I'm going to keep tending to this fire so it can spark again. Right? He's complimented, and here as we approach the end, verse 11, she says, come, my beloved, and let us go out into the fields and lodge in the villages. Let us go out early to the vineyards. She's saying, hey, let's steal away together. Let's go on a trip together and see whether the vines have budded, whether the grape blossoms have opened, and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. She says, let's steal away. And again, vineyard imagery is often in this book, her body or their intimate life. And here she's saying, let's steal away together and let's see if the vines are budding. Let's see if they're in bloom. Let's go see. And what I love about that, and this is your last point, is, man, if you say, I'm committed to personal growth, I'm going to celebrate what's in the other, I'm going to make a covenant, I'm not going anywhere, then when all that's set, that resolve is firm, then you cultivate. This is my plot of land. This is my vineyard. I'm not going to leave and go to some other vineyard. This is the one that I'm going to cultivate it and make the best I can, right? And I'm going to work on this. And she says, let's go, let's get away, and let's see if we can continue to work this garden and to make it grow. In Britain, the number one cause of divorce is I fell out of love. And I hear that and I'm like, brother, that's like saying I fell out of shape. That's not how it works. There were some decisions involved here. And so here, how do you keep a marriage alive? You cultivate, you work, you find ways to steal away. Will that cost time? Yes. Money? Yes. Effort? Yes. The flow of the culture is towards isolation, and you have to swim against it. For Donna and I, we found date nights were fairly easy when we were young without kids. Once you bring babysitters into the mix and parking in DC, I mean, you're deep in the hole financially and you haven't eaten anything yet. And so we got to a point where you're like, how do you do this? And then kids are home at night and we want to be there with them at night. And how do you do this? And we finally realized, you know what? Fridays are my day off. We're doing a Friday lunch date. We go on a date on Fridays at lunch. And you're like, is that as romantic? Probably not. But it's kind of nice. Places aren't as crowded. And we're finding, hey, there's a little romance on Fridays at lunch. Maybe the vines have budded. Maybe the grape blossoms have opened. And we're out in the vineyard and life is good, right? Verse 13, she says, the mandrakes give forth fragrance, and besides our door are all the choice fruits, new as well as old, which I have laid up for you, O my beloved. I love that. Mandrakes were seen widely as an aphrodisiac all the way back from Genesis. It's used that way. We won't go into it. But the idea is there's sexual imagery here. And she says, beside our door is choice fruits. They would do that in the Talmud. You would hang fruit by the wedding tent. The idea was enjoy your marital love and may it be fruitful. Maybe you be fruitful and multiply, like Genesis says. And she says, hey, let's get together. Let's compliment, celebrate, enjoy each other. And now let's consummate that marriage again. Let's go and have a vacation escapade together. And she says, I have brought some fruit for you, new and old. She said, there's time-honored ways we express love to each other, and I'm going to do those. And there's some new exciting things I have planned that I just bought. So she's telling him, hey, I'm going to keep this thing fresh. We're going to have fun together. One person got that. All right, look good. Let's keep going. Oh, bless you, sister. Okay, verse 8. Oh, that you were like a brother to me who nursed at my mother's breasts. If I found you outside, I would kiss you and none would despise me. Ooh, what is this? Well, in her culture, public displays of affection were not welcome outside of family. It was normal to hold hands with your family, normal to kiss your family. And she's saying, I wish you were family so we could display our affection out in public, right? People don't like it when you weren't family back then. They start yelling, get a room or something like that. And she says in verse 2, I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranate. All right, so anyway, she's like, I want to get you. We can't do this out here. Let's get a room. Verse 3. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. This is a sexual position. Notice it's not, previously in the book, it was let his hands embrace me, etc. Now she's saying, we're there, folks. But then she ends in verse 4, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. Again, she looks at the young maidens and says, wait for this. Wait for a guy who's committed to growth spiritually, that he's walking with Christ and he's going to become more and more a man of integrity and compassion because of God, not because of you, so that he can love you like that even when you're not at your best. So you get someone who's committed to growing and someone who will celebrate the good in you, not denying your flaws, but not focusing on them either. And as you celebrate each other, you make a covenant. I'm going nowhere with you. I'm with you or without you. I'm with you till death do us part. And when you get that, then you cultivate and you deepen and you work that piece of land, you work that relationship to let it be all that it possibly can be. I don't look over the fence for greener pastures. I cultivate the grass right here. And she says, you wait for a relationship like that. Now to close, as I say that, I know many people, when you preach stuff like this, you go, well, Ben, that would have been great advice for me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Now, this isn't a prescription, this is an autopsy. Because I already made a mess. And so yay for the kids, but I'm too far gone. And let me just say this, that there's imagery in the Old Testament. God comes to a prophet, Hosea, and says, I want you to marry a woman named Gomer. She's not going to be faithful to you. She's going to leave you. And she does. And she goes into the city and she gives herself away sexually, relationally, emotionally to all manner of people in the city. And she runs as far from that man as she can to enjoy every lust the city has to offer. And like many people who've done the same, it does not fill her with experiences. It exacts from her youthful beauty. And at one moment, Hosea gets word she's being auctioned on a slave block and she can't get full price for a going captive. And God comes to Hosea and say, you go and pay more than they're asking. And it's a heartbreaking scene, but what God is saying is, Hosea, I want you to show people what I'm like. He said, because Gomer's like the nation of Israel. It's like the people of God. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Every single person is gonna fail at this. You read this book and some of you, like Brendan pointed out last week in an amazing sermon, he was pointing out that, hey, Solomon broke this. Solomon was such a mess by the end. It left a crater, not just in his relationships, but in the whole nation. So that doesn't make this untrue. Everything I just told you is true and good and you should do. But if I just leave you with a list of shoulds, I don't know that you'll make it. And the good news is that's not the gospel. The gospel is there is a way we should live and we hold up that standard. But what happens when you've broke it all? What happens when you've ruined it all? What happens when you shattered it all and you're on the slave block used up and no one wants you? God says what happens is I send my rescuer to show up and say, I'm paying full price for that one. He says, that's what my love is like. My love is Jesus Christ, the best of the best that heaven has to offer, exiting heaven and coming for you. And said, I want you. And I bleed out for you. I am aware of your failings and I choose you. And what I love about the book of Hosea is God will make the valley of trouble a doorway into hope. That's the beauty of our gospel. So if you're here today and say, I'm in a valley of trouble, I'm sitting in rubble, I'm sitting in ash, that's where the gospel begins. God takes the worst day of human history, the death of Jesus, and makes it the instrument of our redemption. And he can look at you sitting in a valley of ashes and tears, and he says, but I can use those ashes in the soil and I can bring forth life again. I can make the valley of trouble a doorway of hope. The gospel's too good. So if you're like, I failed, yes, you have. So have we all. But the good news is the God of the holy standard is the God who met that standard for us and empowers us by his grace to live it in our relationships. Donna and I even now are in a house that had been neglected for 20 years. And when we moved in, 20 years of neglect had devolved it into a very broken, sad place inside. But as we continue to work on it, cultivate it, is it perfect? No. There's like 7 workers on it right now. I was in the closet the other day and suddenly see a guy working on the house. And so the work continues, but it's a different universe away from where it was when we bought it. And the grace of God can move in and change you. And the grace of God can continue to work on you if you let it. So don't lose hope. And don't lose hope in the possibility that God is in the business of blessing individuals and marriages. There's a way for it to thrive for decades and decades to come.